Well, good evening. Welcome tonight to our Gospel of Matthew Bible study. Let me get my phone adjusted here. You know, last week I was at the church. Some of you who watched saw me in my study at the church, and I was there because I was supposed to speak at the Metropolitan Handbell concert at their kind of, intermission whenever you sort of ask for the donation for the offering. And I don't know if you could hear or not, but at 7:30 the concert started, and in my office, which is just across the hall from the multi-purpose room where that was going, I could hear handbells playing. It was a beautiful concert, and so when our study was finished, I just ran down the hall and into the multi-purpose room and got to hear a wonderful concert. There's always a lot going on at the church, and Becky plays in the handbell, so she wasn't able to be with us last week, but she's here with us tonight. She's going to be reading the scripture for us, and it's good to have her back among us after a couple of meeting commitments and other things that have kept her away. As far as things going on at Christ Church, I don't have a whole lot to plug tonight. But I will plug this, the men's breakfast on Saturday morning. If guys, if those of you who are on already, and ladies, if your husband is interested in a good fresh cooked breakfast, it'll be on tap on Saturday morning. We start eating at 8:30, and there'll be a brief program where we'll find out about some of the latest in men's ministries. A lot of things are restarting. The Fix It ministry is restarting. Habitat's been going for a while. Some of our small groups, I think we may have interest in starting another one or two. So anyhow, we'll hear about those kind of things. I'm speaking on something new at Christ Church called Fresh Expressions, and we'll be out probably way before 10 o'clock. We always say we'll be out at 10, but I'm going to keep my presentation short because I know people are busy on Saturdays. I think that's it as far as promos and commercials. So let's
cookout for the boomers.
Oh, Becky just reminded me of a cookout coming next Tuesday evening for the boomers. Now this is the boomers are for people 55 and older. I joked when I announced this on Sunday that I look forward to being old enough to join the boomers one of these days. And they'll probably card me this time, but I'm planning to be there. They're having a cookout and gathering down at the Scout Hut. It'll be this coming Tuesday night. You do need a ticket. The tickets are $8, and that'll pay for the food and other things. I have a building fund campaign team meeting. We'll be having a building fund campaign, hopefully our last one this summer, and I've got a team together to get that organized. So I'll be running down to meet with the boomers for a little while, and then back up to the church building to do my meeting. Anything else, Becky? No, she says that's enough on commercials. Last week we did chapters 8 and 9, which really focused on Jesus' healing. I put those two chapters together for that reason. Matthew groups the healings. There are 10 of them, and he groups them in a group of 3, another group of 3, and then a group of 4. And the reason Matthew does that, remember, when he wrote his gospel, there were almost no printed copies. So people had to kind of memorize scripture, and putting things in groups helps us to do that. The first group of 3 was a leper, a centurion servant, and Peter's mother-in-law. The second group were 2 men with demons. Remember, there was a herd of pigs and a paralyzed man. Then there was a group of 4, a woman with a flow of blood, Jairus' daughter, whom he raised from the dead, a blind man, and a mute man. What do we observe in all those healings? A couple of you post for me here if you would. What are some of the things that as those healings take place, what do we observe that is happening? Maybe why Jesus did them. What was his rationale? what did the healings result from? Maybe that might get some people thinking. I observed that in many of those, there was a certain element present in the person who was healed. Not in all of them, but somebody chime in here. While you're thinking of those, I'll throw out one. I observed during those healings that opposition began to rise. We hadn't seen much opposition to Jesus at this point, and now whenever he says, "Son, your sins are forgiven," the scribes and the Pharisees kind of went ballistic. They're thinking, how can he do that? This is blasphemy. Only God can forgive sins. And Jesus said, which is easier to say your sins are forgiven, or get up and take your mat and walk? And so he healed the young man, and he did get up and walk. There's a couple other things in those healings that I observe. In general, healing takes place as a result of faith. One in particular, the centurion had phenomenal faith. He said, "You can heal my servant from a distance. You don't need to come into my house." And Jesus commented on that great faith. Another thing that I noticed in those healings is Jesus' great compassion for people. They're coming at him almost so fast he can get nothing else done at this particular time. But he sees people in need. He cares for them. Jairus, the synagogue ruler, came to see Jesus, and he went right to his house and raised his young daughter from the dead. Jesus says a beautiful and compelling thing in chapter 9, verses 37 and 38. I'm going to read that again. Jesus says, "The harvest is plentiful and the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest field." What does this teach us? When we think about Jesus saying the harvest is plentiful, there's another place where what Jesus says is the fields are white to harvest, and he's talking about the fruit that's on the grain is ready to be harvested. The fields are white with grain, but I don't have enough workers. I need more workers to go out into the field. What do we learn from that passage, other than it's harvest time where Jesus is? But he's going to set up this week's scripture when he says that. But I think there's a lesson in it for us today, at least one. One of the things that occurs to me, I am clergy, and sometimes clergy gets it into their heads that they're supposed to do all the ministry in the church. In fact, sometimes people in the church think that the clergy are supposed to do that, and that is totally wrong. If Jesus is saying, "I need more workers in the harvest," and when he says the fields are white to harvest, or the harvest is plentiful, he's talking about people. There's people out here. Okay, Susan says we're supposed to go out and tell people about Jesus. When we do that, we become workers in the harvest. Clergy are not supposed to do it all. We're not equipped to do it all. Oftentimes lay people are, yes, the workers are us. Oftentimes lay people are out where the harvest is. They're out where people are. And it's very important for us to call people into ministry. All of us are called as workers. The harvest is plentiful today. Sometimes whenever we ask someone in the church to do something, it's almost like we are apologetic about it. It's like, I know you're busy and you probably don't have time to do this, but I wonder if you would, and then we ask them. That is no way to ask people. Instead, we should say there's something really important to do. This is something that the church needs. It's something that people need. And you seem to have the gifts for doing that. Then the person feels called into ministry, which we are. I won't say who he is or what ministry I ask him to serve in, but there's a new member of the church. who has a gift for doing something, and we need this. It's a leadership role. And I was a little hesitant to ask him just because he is so new to the church, but when I asked him, he immediately said yes. And then in a meeting last week, he told me I was so affirmed that after joining the church, after a short time, I've been asked to take on this role. I'm really excited about doing this. Well, see, our ministries, being out in the harvest field, ought to excite us. We ought to see the benefit of what we do. Becky, are you ready to read?
I'm ready.
Jesus is about to send the 12 out on the job training. And it's for us to listen and say, okay, how does he send them out? What would that say for us today? So let's, you're going to hear the word called, and I want you to be thinking about what that means. What does being called mean? 1 through 10, please.
He called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out evil spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, who is called Peter, and his brother Andrew. James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. Philip and Bartholomew. Thomas and Matthew the tax collector. James, son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus. Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Do not go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. As you go, preach this message. The kingdom of heaven is near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. Do not take along any gold or silver or copper in your belts. Take no bag for the journey, or extra tunic, or sandals, or a staff, for the worker is worth his keep.
Okay. Right off the bat, in the first verse, it says Jesus called the disciples to him, and then he sends them out. When you hear the word called, when you hear that someone says, well, I was called to ministry, what do you usually think of? Now, don't overthink this. What comes to mind right off the bat whenever somebody says, well, she received or he received a call to ministry? These guys have just received a call. Jesus calls them to him, calls these 12 disciples to him. We're going to talk about the fact that they're special disciples, but he called them. Before he sends them, he calls them. What comes to mind? One of the things that a lot of us think of is, well, if a person is called to ministry, they must be a pastor. They must be a clergy person. Okay, Lynn says it is a commission. It is a commission. Lynn says, are they asked to be a disciple? We all are called. And whenever we're called, we're called into a ministry. Most of us are called as laypersons into a ministry. The example that I used earlier, where the young man was so appreciative of having been asked to take on a role, I think he felt a calling to do that. And that's where there is such a difference between working as a, quote, volunteer and being called into a ministry. I don't like the term volunteer at church. I think we do ministry, and it may be working at the Bethlehem Center, it may be being a greeter on Sunday morning, it may be singing in the choir. Whatever it is, we should feel a call to do it, or we should look for something else that we do feel a call to do. don't ever think that being called just applies to preachers. Every person is called to ministry. Becky and I were in Knoxville for some time, and I attended a workshop up there led by a guy named Bill Carter. Bill Carter was this awesome leader in Holston Conference. He was a pastor, then he had some other positions. Bill passed away last March, and I think he was 94 years old, so he was around for a long time. He wrote a lot of books. He came to Christ Church one time to lead a leadership training event, and he kept talking about this new book that he had written on peanut butter theology. And I can remember saying, well, Bill, that's an interesting name. Can I buy that on Amazon or somewhere? And he goes, hey, come with me. And other people had asked him about this. So 4 or 5 of us followed him out to his car on break, and he popped the trunk open, and here was a case of those peanut butter theology books. And he sold them to us. He didn't give us a book, but Bill wrote a number of books. And so I was in this workshop with Bill, and his title for the workshop was Everyone is a Minister. And this was one of the first times that I had thought about it in those terms. Bill reinforced to me that we are all called by God, and most of us are called as laypersons. And it's like Lynn said there, we're called to use our gifts. We're given these gifts for ministry, and so we're called to be ministers. I noticed that Bill's handouts were all like they were in draft form, and there were a lot of illustrations and drawings, and it was like, wow, this looks like he's gone to a lot of effort, I guess is what I was thinking, for a workshop. And a few weeks later, I was at the Cokesbury bookstore or looking through their catalog, and I saw Bill's latest book. The title was Everyone a Minister. I have that book. It's we had been guinea pigs in that workshop as he threw things out, as he asked questions and got answers. We were kind of his guinea pigs. But it's a really important thing for all of us to embrace, is that we are called, we have gifts, and when those gifts are put into service, we are ministers. Here for the first time, Matthew gives us the names of the 12. Now, he always calls them the 12 disciples. Matthew doesn't use the word apostles as much as some of the other gospel writers. Can somebody tell me what the word apostle means? We know what disciple is. That's someone who studies, who follows a rabbi or a teacher. That's a disciple. Disciples often traveled with their teacher. A disciple is a follower. So Jesus had dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of disciples at one point. On his way, my last study was the journey to Jerusalem. I did that as a Lenten study. And whenever he got to Jerusalem, there were, I think, probably 100 people following along with him as disciples. But what he names here are the 12 that we know of as apostles. And he has an interesting way of naming them. An apostle is someone who is, quote, sent out. They are called and sent. Okay, Lynn just said it. An apostle is sent out on a mission. Greg says sent on a mission. Yes, apostles are sent. They're almost like an ambassador. They go representing Christ or the church, and oftentimes go into places where there's a different language, a different culture. They're different than a missionary, but apostles are sent, and they are messengers of Christ. Now, Jesus organizes these guys by twos. He does that for a number of things. One is safety. Another is accountability. You know, you wake up out on the road and you're sort of tired and you say, maybe we'll sleep in today. And the other apostle says, no, we got a lot of people to see. Come on, let's go. And so there's accountability there. There's companionship. two heads are better than one. You know, you get asked a tough question. It's nice to have someone along with you. Matthew does not say that Jesus sent them out by twos. I've got in my Bible, it says sends out the 12. Some Bibles say sends out the apostles by twos. Does yours have a heading, Becky?
It says sends out the 12 disciples.
Okay. But he names them in twos. Peter and his brother Andrew, James and his brother John. I tell you, I wouldn't have liked to have listened in on some of the discussions. I think the discussion I probably most would have wanted to listen in on is Matthew and Thomas. Weren't they together, Becky?
Yeah,
Matthew and Thomas. Think about that. We sometimes call him Doubting Thomas. He was really analytical Thomas. He needed to be shown things, but he was also very brave. And here's Matthew, a tax collector who's become an apostle, disciple, now an apostle. It would be neat to be a fly on the wall watching each of those teams of two. He tells them in what Becky read to go to the lost sheep of Israel. Only go to the lost sheep of Israel. In other words, avoid the towns of the Gentiles and the Samaritans. Now, why would he do that? You know that Jesus would eventually reach out to everyone. In fact, in Luke's gospel, he emphasizes how much Jesus reached out to the marginalized. But here he's saying to his apostles, only go to the homes, the towns of the lost sheep of Israel. Why would he do that? Anybody have an answer to that? Seems like it takes forever sometimes for the sound waves to travel over these phone systems, get to you, and then come back to me with your response. But it happens. And who are we to be complaining about our technology? Isn't it awesome that we can do this? Here I sit in my study at home, and you all are at home, and we're doing a Bible study together. Technology is something that we so take for granted. I was with my little grandson, he's 5 years old, the other day, and I called Becky on just a regular call instead of calling her on FaceTime or something else. And Dorian runs over and he says, "Is that Grandma?" And I said, "Yes." And he's looking at my phone and he's saying, "But I can't see her. Where is Grandma?" We've become so accustomed to being, having an image, Zoom calls and all the things that we do. Here's a 5-year-old that thinks, well, whenever you talk to somebody on the phone, you can always see them. My goodness, things have changed for us. Well, I'd ask a question there. Why would he send these people out to the lost sheep of Israel? And I think it's a matter of timing. Jesus wants, and the plan is for the people in Israel to accept Christ, and then for them to reach out to the Gentiles. So it's a priority order. He wants to reach out to the Jews first, have them accept him, and then reach the Gentiles. We notice how he tells them to travel and to live. Freely you've received, freely give. Don't charge anything for this. If you're invited into a home, stay. If a village welcomes you, stay in the village. Don't carry any extra money. It almost sounds like he's saying don't make a lot of plans, but it's more than that. He's saying live trusting. Don't carry extra clothing. Just take what you wear. Don't take extra shoes. Trust that God will provide through the hospitality of people that you will stay with. In another gospel, he says, don't be trading up. If you're invited into a home, go and stay. If somebody in a nicer, bigger home invites you, don't move. Just just pay attention to the essentials. You know, somebody down the street's got a house with a swimming pool. Don't accept their invitation to move up in life, but just know that God provides and depend on that. He says, if anybody in the verses that follow, we won't read those, Becky, but it says, move on when a town will not welcome them. And he says, shake the dust off your feet. You know what the meaning of that is? If a town doesn't welcome you, shake the dust off your feet and move on. This also sounds just a little bit different than what Jesus would teach. You know, it's like ask and seek and knock, and yet here he's saying, okay, go to the Jewish homes, Jewish towns. If they accept you, welcome you, then go and stay there, teach and preach and heal and do the things I've been doing. But if they don't accept you, shake the dust of that town off your feet. You know what what the meaning of that is? Jewish people had this habit. Whenever they would have to travel into Samaria, they thought that was an unclean place. And when they left Samaria, it's like when they crossed over the border, they shook the dust off their feet. It's like, I don't want to carry this Samaritan dust with me. And it's a way for these apostles, if they're not welcome, shaking the dust off their feet of that town is like saying, I'm done with you. I'm leaving. And again, this is a matter of prioritizing. There were lots and lots and lots of villages where people would welcome the apostles, where they would be open to receiving the good news. And Jesus wants to get those apostles there. He doesn't want them. There you go. Lynn says, don't waste time on them. Forget them and move on. It sounds a little cold, but the church today has to sometimes shake the dust off their feet. Sometimes, I know you have trouble believing this, but sometimes in churches there are members who want nothing but to be served. They want everything to be done their way. They criticize, they complain. And some churches will spend all of their time trying to make them happy rather than reaching out to the people who don't know Christ yet. Jesus would say, shake the dust off your feet and move on. Love those people, but don't let them monopolize the church's time. Sometimes we have old, outmoded methods that just don't work in the church anymore. Shake the dust off your feet from those things and move on to something that does work. Becky, we're up to verse 16. Would you read 16 to 23, please?
I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves.
Hold up there just a second. While she continues reading, somebody tell us what it means to send someone out as sheep among wolves. That's why I love that expression. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Be on your guard against men. They will hand you over to the local councils and flog you in their synagogues. On my account, you will be brought before governors and kings as witnesses to them and to the Gentiles. But when they arrest you, do not worry about what to say or how to say it. At that time, you will be given what to say, for it will not be you speaking, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. All men will hate you because of me, but he who stands firm to the end will be saved. When you are persecuted in one place, flee to another. I tell you the truth, you will not finish going through the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes.
Okay. I've already seen some really good answers there. He's sending them out. You know, a sheep would be devoured by wolves. They're an animal of prey. Wolves attack them, sending you out as sheep among wolves. There's going to be opposition. This is not going to be easy. People are going to attack you. I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves. They're going to face a world that included a lot of people who would oppose them. But Jesus doesn't want them to be so naive that they just innocently walk into trouble. He says, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. That packs in so much truth for today. As innocent, as shrewd as snakes, and as innocent as doves. The church today needs to remember that. We have to be shrewd and smart. We have to make good business decisions as a church. Our motives have to be good. You know, whenever we compete banks against each other for a loan, we've done that every time we've built. It's not to hurt banks. No, we want the bank to make money, but we want to get the best deal we can get. Our motives have to be good, but we are supposed to be shrewd as snakes. We're going out as sheep, but he's saying don't innocently walk into something and just be dumb. Be as shrewd as snakes. The church has to be smart in many, many areas. But we have to make sure our motives are good, that we're not trying to take advantage of anyone. He told also, whenever you're brought before judges and rulers, prepare this way. And then that's kind of it's almost like, don't think about it ahead of time. The Holy Spirit will give you what to say. God the Father will direct you. Don't worry about it. This is not telling us, if you're asked to come and teach a lesson, to just show up and say, well, God will give me the plan. If you're asked to preach, well, I won't prepare a sermon. God will just give it to me when I step into the pulpit. No, that's not what this is about at all. This is about when you're called in, being accused, be open to God's leading and how to defend yourself. At the beginning of verse 22, Jesus tells them something that seems obvious. When you're persecuted in a place, flee to another. That seems so obvious, and yet I was thinking about this just the other day. At another point, Jesus says, when someone slaps you on the cheek, turn the other side of your face. And here he's saying, when you're attacked, get out of there. In other words, Jesus always, it seems like, following him is difficult. And whenever he says, turn your cheek, he's saying, don't resist that person. It's not worth it. But here he's saying, I don't want you to sacrifice your life. I want you to spread the good news. So if you're persecuted, get out of there. We're going to see later in the book of Acts how the church was persecuted. And what did they do? They spread out. It happened in Jerusalem. They got out of Jerusalem and they went to places like Antioch, and they took their faith with them, and the church spread. So Jesus is saying, when you're persecuted, get away from there. The Apostle Paul did that in a number of times. He also says something in verse 23, I tell you, you will not finish going through the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. He didn't mean before the Son of Man comes back again. We could read it into that. I think Jesus is saying you're going to see the Messiah come into the lives of those you are touching, those you're teaching, those you're preaching to, those you're healing. You're going to see Christ come into their life. Becky, 28 through 31.
Sorry, 28. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from the will of your Father. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows.
Jesus is giving us assurance here, first to those apostles and also to us 2,000 years later, that God loves us. God cares about us. He knows what's going on in our lives, always reaching out to us. When he says God knows when a sparrow falls to the ground, and God knows how many hairs are on our heads, we could take that literally, and I'm sure God knows, okay, how many hundreds of thousands of hairs are on my head, but that's not important. The important thing is his meaning beyond that says God is very familiar with what's going on in your life. God knows you. God cares. He's already told us that God provides for us. Becky, 32 and 33, just those two verses.
Whoever acknowledges me before men, I will also acknowledge him before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before men, I will disown him before my Father in heaven.
That's a troubling verse to me. I think about Peter denying Jesus. Now, Peter had heard Jesus teach this. Whoever disowns me, I will disown them. Peter denied him. On the night that Jesus was arrested, they said, you're one of the apostles, aren't you? You're following this guy, Jesus. And Peter says, no. 3 times he did that. He disowned Jesus. There is no doubt about it. Now, Jesus forgave Peter. He says, I'll disown you. And yet Peter was sorry, repented. And so Jesus reinstated Peter. But we can disown Jesus without verbally saying, well, I don't know Jesus. I'm not a Christian. We can disown Christ by the way we live. We can disown Christ by never giving Christ credit for the good things that we do. That's why it troubles me. Sometimes I have the opportunity to step forward as a Christian, and I kind of hang back. It's the kind of crowd that's not going to appreciate or think kindly of me as a Christian. And if I hang back in that situation, in a way, I'm disowning Christ. It gives us something to think about. It gives us something to encourage us to step forward. Becky, would you read some more here? 34 through 39.
Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father.
Hold on just a second. I do that to her all the time. I think of the question I want to ask when she's finished, and it'll help with our timing if while she's reading this, you're answering the question. What does this mean? What is Jesus saying when he says what she just read? I've come to turn father against son. I've come to turn family member against family member. That does not sound like Christ. So what do you think that means? Sorry, if you would read on.
Okay. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Anyone who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And anyone who does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it.
Well, that's a tough teaching. Okay, Lynn's right. He intends that we put him first. There's another verse, and because of the Greek, it reads like, unless you hate your father, unless you hate your mother, you can't love me. And that doesn't literally mean you have to hate them. This verse here, these verses here in Matthew say it differently. If you can't love them more. You've got to put me first, in other words. And then this part about, I've come to turn father against son and mother against daughter and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. We say, well, Jesus didn't really come to stir up dissension or trouble. What he's saying is, Yes, somebody else is answering here. Let me get to, yeah. If our family members do not accept Christ, we owe ourselves to Him, not to them. And that's really at the heart of what Jesus is saying here. If we accept Christ and others don't, we almost become their enemy. And in most families today, that's not true. A family may feel like we're weird. It may be something where they don't want to talk with us about our faith if they're not believers. But in some families, it's a much bigger deal. Let me give you an example. A man came to Christ Church. Now, this has been a few years ago, but he came to Christ Church. He started getting involved. He came to a Sunday school class I was teaching. He got involved with some of our small groups, and he accepted Christ. And in doing that, he shared with me that he was Jewish. He'd been brought up in the synagogue. He'd been brought up doing all the Jewish things, customs and practices, and he really was interested in learning about the New Testament. He'd read the Old Testament, but he was really interested in growing as a Christian. And I can remember him one day saying to me, "David, things are really tough for me and my family now." And I asked him to describe that, and he told me that his father and his brothers and sisters, they had, of course, remained Jewish. They had accepted Christ, but he says they kind of accept me. They give me the benefit of the doubt, but he says my mother she's just about disowned me. And the way she put it was, you finally let the Christians get their hooks into you. And he was not able to help her to see, no, this is a wonderful thing. Nobody's misled me or pulled me in. But see, there's somebody that I think of them when I read this passage. See, that Christ had come between this Jewish man and his mother. The rest of his family able to accept him and to keep right on loving him, but she wasn't. And so and many of us are so fortunate that our accepting Christ didn't cause that kind of dissension or division within our families. Paul would later say, if you are married to a non-Christian, I think of this verse when I read this. He says, if you're married to a non-Christian, stay married to them. Oftentimes, a faithful Christian wife has brought a non-believing husband into the faith. And so he's saying, it's like Paul is saying, you're being a Christian may cause problems in your marriage, but don't let that cause you to separate. Try to stay married if you can and bring the other person along to Christ. Now, I'm going to ask you, as Becky reads these last 3 verses, I'm going to ask you to sort of tell me what you think of this chapter. I slowed down and took this chapter just one for tonight. Becky's going to read verses 40 through 42, and I want to ask you, what strikes you about this chapter and the teachings that we've had in it? If you would, go ahead, Becky.
He who receives you receives me, and he who receives me receives the one who sent me. Anyone who receives a prophet because he is a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And anyone who receives a righteous man because he is a righteous man will receive a righteous man's reward. And if anyone gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones because he is my disciple, I tell you the truth, he will certainly not lose his reward.
See, those verses are saying, okay, there's going to be people out there who turn against you. There's going to be people out there who persecute you, but blessed are the ones who will receive you. And when he says these little ones, he's not talking about children. He's talking about people who are new in the faith. And he's saying even giving them a cold drink of water will cause the person to be blessed. Now, give me some thoughts about this chapter. Pat says the reward and cost of discipleship. Both of those are intermingled throughout this. You're called into ministry. Go and do your ministry. Hopefully you'll be rewarded. There is reward, but there's always a cost. Jesus said, be ready to pick up your cross and follow me. Your cross is your death. Instructions for being an apostle or missionary. Yes. These, to me, and whenever Jesus sends out the apostles, whenever he teaches his disciples, he's talking right to us. He's telling us, here's how you should do this. Don't go expecting reward. Don't go expecting comfort. Go and serve. Use your gifts to go and be in ministry. This is a packed chapter, isn't it? It's also telling us it won't necessarily be easy. Being a Christian, there is reward in that, as Susan is saying, or as Pat was saying, there is reward in that, but it's not easy. We'll have to go against culture. We'll have to go against relationships sometimes, but the reward is certainly worth the cost. In this life and in the next life. Well, folks, we're out of time. That was chapter 10. We'll do 2 chapters again next week. We'll do Matthew 11 and 12. Hope to see you next week, and at least I hope to see your names on here. And I know a number of people, more than are ever on the Facebook Live session, a number of people watch later, and I'm always so pleased to hear from you and to know that you're enjoying the study. Well, good night, and God bless.